In this episode, we're building this awesome 3-string cigar box guitar, although I'm showing it to you upside down because it's a righty. This is a full build video, so make sure you stick around all the way to the end. I'm Jeff, you're watching Home Built Workshop. Well, it's high time we get to building another guitar. I've got this cool cigar box here. I think it's gonna make a cool 3-string cigar box guitar. Well, let's get started. I'm gonna start by making the neck first. I'm using hard maple for this neck because it's nice and sturdy, and especially since this is not gonna have a truss rod, I wanna use a material that's good and solid. The way I build most of my necks begins by attaching my template to the piece of wood with some double-sided tape. Then I bandsaw off the excess material and route it flush on the router table. Before I remove my routing template, I'm going to drill the pilot holes for my tuners. Here I'm marking out where I'm going to cut an extra piece of wood that's going to get laminated to the heel of the neck. I'm just going to rough this piece out on the bandsaw. Now I need to work out the overall length of the neck. I think this is going to be easiest if I can actually set it in place in the top. So I'll just mark out and cut away the material in the lid, which will allow me to put this neck blank in place. It helps a lot if you hit record when you cut out the relief section where the neck's going to fit. After cutting a notch in the lid and forgetting to record it for you to watch, I can now test fit the neck, and it fits really good. Now to work out the overall length, I'm going to measure my exact scale length from the nut to the bridge. I'll make a few marks to indicate where the bridge is going to go. From there I can trim away the excess length on the neck. It's time to apply some glue and glue on what I guess we'll call the neck heel. Once that glue has dried, I'll use my router to trim that exactly flush with the neck. And this is why I was okay just roughing this piece out on the bandsaw. I want to have the neck block portion of the neck wide enough so that I can route my pickup cavities directly into it without affecting the strength. So I'm going to cut down a few more pieces that'll get glued on, kind of like wings. To glue this block together, I'm going to use the lid kind of as a fixture to help hold everything in place. I've cut a little piece of parchment paper that'll fit inside there. By using the lid, it allows me to keep everything aligned up exactly where it needs to be. And once I get it clamped and the glue sets, I'll remove it so that I can finish drying. That way there's no chance of any sort of squeeze out from gluing anything right to the lid. Before I glue these blocks in place, I'm going to take some very careful measurements and make sure the neck is centered in the lid. I've got it all clamped in place here inside the lid. I'm going to let this sit for a few minutes, give that glue a couple minutes to set up, and then I'll remove it from the lid and let the glue finish drying. I'm at a spot where I can create the recess, which is going to allow the fretboard and this portion of the neck to sit proud of the top. Once I get that fitting and I know exactly the depth that I have, then I can finish cutting the recess down here in the box, which will let everything close. To calculate the depth of that cut, I'm just going to measure the thickness of the top plus the 1/8 inch that I want the neck to sit proud of the top. And that's how deep I'm going to cut this recess. There's a bunch of different ways to cut this recess. I could use a router sled. I could even fire up the CNC machine if I built the program for it. But I think the quickest and easiest to set up for me is going to be to use the table saw and just make multiple passes until I have all the material removed. Once I'm done, there's just a little bit of cleanup with a sharp chisel and some sanding to smooth it all out. I like that fit. Now I can take this final measurement here and notch this lower portion of the box so that everything will close nicely. Looks like I need to cut that about 20 millimeters deep. I'm gonna go about 18 just to be on the safe side. We'll fit it once we get it cut. So I've just run into a problem that I was kind of anticipating, although part of me was hoping that I wasn't gonna find this problem. But what I've run into is, now that I've got the neck fitting in this little neck pocket, I guess we can call it, once everything is assembled, the swing of this lid is not allowing everything to fall into place. I've run into this problem before and it's something I've had to deal with, but I always try to at least wait until it's actually a problem instead of just assuming, but the lid won't close with this in place. So what I didn't want to do originally was remove the lid, but right now I don't really have any choice. These hinges are only held on with like some little tabs, I think, that are attached to the back of this hinge. I imagine it's some sort of a pressed stamped unit that it just knocks through there and the tabs get bent over. So I think I can straighten those tabs out, carefully remove the lid from the top, and then what I'll have to do is probably reinstall it with some little bolts or something. I'll see if I can find some really small brass or copper bolts or screws. There you can see the little prongs that just get shoved through the side. The tip gets bent over and that's what holds everything in place. When I reassemble this, if I can't use these prongs, which I don't think I'll be able to, I think there's enough material right here where I could just drill a small hole and use some little small bolts. There, with that little crisis averted, the lid fits really well now. Everything closes up. There's one last thing I want to do before I start on the fretboard. I want to bring a tiny little aspect of the acoustic guitar build into this project. I've got a little heel area here that will end up shaping once we get into carving the neck. I want to add a little decorative heel cap to this portion right here. This is a piece of spalted maple that I'm going to glue on as the heel cap. With the heel cap clamped in place, I'm going to remove the box so that there's no chance of it getting glued together. While that glue's drying, it's time to break out the fret slotting tools and make a fretboard. For this build, I'm using a 25.5-inch scale length, and the fretboard is made out of a piece of bloodwood. Now it's time to glue this thing on. I've got a center line marked out on my fretboard as well as on the neck. I also have the location of the nut marked on the neck so that I can line it up with the slots we cut in the fretboard. All we need to do, line up those marks and glue it in place. Guess we can cut off this overhang too. Okay, how come no one told me I had dirt all over my head? Oh well. We got good squeeze out all the way around. Just let that dry. Due to the shape of this neck, when I routed the fretboard flush, it left just a little rounded portion at the end that's super easy to clean up with a small file. Here I'm laying out for the fretboard markers. Don't mind the laser whirring away in the background, it's working on another project. Now I'll use a nice sharp brad point drill bit and drill the holes for the fretboard markers. I'm going to do the same copper and crushed seashell inlays that I've done on several builds in the past. I think it looks really cool and I enjoy putting these in. If you've seen some of my other builds, you already know how I do these, but if you haven't, I insert a little copper tube and then fill it with crushed seashells. Once the tube is filled up, I saturate the entire thing with CA glue to glue it all in. It makes a really cool, kind of a mosaic pattern in the seashells. Once all of the tubes are filled with CA glue, it's really important to let this dry naturally and not use any accelerator. If you've used accelerator on CA glue before, you'll know that it can cause it to foam up and bubble, and we definitely don't want this to bubble up. We want it to dry nice and clear. With the CA dry, now really you just use any means necessary to level it out. I like to use my belt grinder to remove the majority of the excess material. It takes it off really quick. With the fretboard markers mostly leveled out, now I'm going to sand a slight radius in this fretboard. Really, for a build like this, it's not really necessary, but I want to try to make this thing play as well as I can, so I think a radius is going to help with that. I'm going to use, you've seen them before, these awesome radius blocks from Skyscraper Guitars to get the initial radius sanded in there. Then I'll switch over to some of my 3D printed fretboard radius blocks and fine-tune it, working up through the grids. If you guys are interested in checking out either of these radius blocks, these sweet orange ones from Skyscraper or my 3D printed ones, there's links down below in the description. Time to sand. I decided to sand this fretboard up to 2000 grit. I think it looks pretty good. Now I need to reduce the thickness of the headstock. This is also going to create the transition from the fretboard into the headstock. To do that, I like to use my oscillating spindle sander and this handy little jig that I created. It's adjustable and allows me to get exactly the thickness that I need. With the thickness of the headstock determined, I can now use my stepped drill bit and finish drilling the tuner holes. This drill bit has a brad point on it, which I'll center on the pilot holes that I drilled earlier. And I think now we're ready for some frets. I'm using Evo Gold fret wire for this build. I think it's going to match the gold hardware and the gold lettering on this box, and I think it's really going to look good and kind of bring everything together. Installing frets is one of those processes for me that I'm always changing and trying to find a way that works better. I've cut all the frets individually before, and I've tried to do them all one at a time, and I've tried many different methods, tapping them in, pressing them in. This time around, I'm trying a combination of tapping the fret in, cutting it to length, Then, once they're all partly started, then I'll go through with my arbor press and press them all in. So far, I think I like this method the best. Let me know down in the comments what your preferred method of installing frets is. We have a visitor. What? What? You gonna finish this for me? Are you? No? You're not? They're no help. After getting absolutely no assistance from the cat, I had to grab the arbor press and finish pressing in all of these frets. One of these days, when I have a little more space, I want to build a tall stand for an arbor press so that I can work standing up at eye level. It'd be way easier than this deal. But for now, frets are in. Now I'll use my homemade fret end files and file all of the fret edges nice and flush to the fretboard. Then I'll use my angled file to file a slight bevel on the ends. Right after I filed the frets flush, well, that's a tongue twister, I installed the side marker dots. Now, for some reason, I didn't film this. These are what I used for side marker dots. These are mosaic pins intended for knife making. I think they look really cool, and I really like the copper and the steel that's used in these pins. Well, with the neck pretty well done, we're ready to start shaping this thing, but before I do that, I want to take advantage of the time I'm going to be shaping this and let some glue dry. I need a way to attach the neck to the box, so I've cut a couple of blocks that I'm going to glue into these corners. The neck will sit down on that, and I'll be able to run some screws down into these blocks. Plus, it'll also help reinforce the box. So I'm going to glue that up now so that it can dry while I'm shaping the neck. Now I'll set this aside, let it dry, and we'll get this neck shaped. With the neck set up on my carving buck, I've armed myself with my trusty Shinto rasp, and it's time to get an arm workout in. In an effort to save a little bit of time, I tried a carving burr in my rotary tool, but I didn't really like the way the end result was, so I ultimately set this aside and went back to doing it by hand. Well, we've still got quite a bit of final sanding to do, but overall, the shaping is complete. I think we're ready to move on. I guess before I move on, I need to clean up this mess. There's always such a mess in this process. There, now with some of that mess out of the way, we got a little room to work. The blocks that we glued into the blocks. Anyway, those things are dry. Now what I want to do is fit the neck. I want to mark out where I can drill some holes to attach the neck to the box. I believe what I want to do are use some regular neck ferrules and neck screws, only instead of putting it through the back, I want to drill the holes in the four corners of this box, recess the ferrules, and then I can screw the neck block into these other blocks. Lots of blocks here. I did decide down at this end to move the ferrules to the inside of where the bridge is going to mount, just to make sure I've got plenty of room for the screws that are going to mount the bridge. It's not going to make any difference. It's still going to be held in with 4 screws. These will just be on the inside. The bridge will mount a little bit outer from those ferrules. Once I have the recesses drilled for the ferrules, I'll use a smaller drill bit and drill a through hole for the mounting screws. This is really easy because the Forstner bit leaves a little center mark that I can use to center the hole inside the recess. To mark the locations of the screw holes inside the box, I've put the neck back in place, and I'm using a sharp pick to transfer that mark inside the box. Time for a test fit. Now I need to locate exactly where the bridge is going to go. I know about where it needs to be, but we got to get this right. I'm going to use a couple different methods to kind of help double check myself to make sure I have everything in alignment. I'll begin by putting some low-tack masking tape on the cigar box. This is so I can make some pencil marks on there and not affect the box. I'll first use my alignment jig that's made from a few yardsticks. I made this in a really old video. I'll put a link down below in the description. This is a handy tool to project the neck onto the body and give you an idea of where everything's going to live. That gives me a few marks that are right in line with the edge of the neck. Now I suppose just using those lines, I could measure out the scale length and center the bridge on those marks and secure it, but I want to make double or maybe even triple sure that I've got this right. I've got the tuners installed temporarily, and I'm going to use some fishing line to sort of string this up. That way I can make triple sure that our alignment's good. Can you tell I'm trying to make sure I get this right? I love it when a plan comes together. If I line up the center string with the center of the fretboard markers, with the bridge where it needs to be, the mounting holes land right on the pencil lines that I drew that are in line with the neck. So I think we're good. I think I want to put the pickup right here in the center. Originally I was going to put it up here at this end, but I almost think I like it right here. Plus it'll get a little bit more of a bridge pickup sound. I've got my routing template here that I cut out on the CNC. It's got two different profiles. This smaller profile will get cut into the lid so that when the lid is put on, that's all you'll see. The other one will get cut into the block that's below the lid, and that will allow me to mount the pickup to the body. Now all we need to do, stick that guy in place and fire up the router. I made sure to route this a little bit down into this block. That way now I can line up this recess with this and then finish routing the cavity. Well, I think that does it for our pickup cavity. Now I just need to drill a recess from the corner of the pocket here that's going to come out the side to allow the wire to pass through, just like you would on an electric guitar. And I'll finish up all the other drilling that I need to do. This includes holes for some sound holes as well as the volume and tone controls. Well, I've got all the pockets routed. I've got all the holes drilled. I've got everything test fit and mocked up. Unfortunately, there's only one thing left to do. I'm gonna eat some jelly beans and we sand. Oh boy, get ready for this. I'll make a deal with you. I'll jump to the end of this sanding if you don't tell my daughter that I stole some of her jelly beans. Do we have a deal? Good. There's a couple things left to do before I can apply the finish. The first is to apply some copper foil shielding tape, which will help me ground the bridge. And of course, I've got to use my branding iron and put the Haley Guitars logo on the headstock. With the logo on there, we've got all the sanding done. We're ready to apply a finish. I'm going to take a second and mask off the fretboard to keep finish off of that. And then I'm going to apply a couple of coats of finishing oil. And now we are ready to put this thing together. I'm going to start out with the top. The holes that I drilled for the sound ports are just going to get filled with some little brass grommets. Kind of matches the color theme we have going on. I'm just going to use some CA glue and glue them in place. I like it. Now I need to remove these little prongs which held the hinge on to secure the lid. Since I'm not going to be reattaching it with these prongs, I'm just going to clip them off. Once I get this all assembled, we'll drill a hole in here and secure these with some small screws. If that takes care of the lid, I think the rest of this assembly we're going to do on the setup bench. By attaching the bridge ground to this copper foil, when I screw the bridge down through all 4 of these screws, it's going to be in contact with the foil, which is going to ground it really well, which is pretty important. Well, now I guess there's only one major component missing. Strings. Let's string this thing up. Oh, and knobs, but we have those. Let's add some strings. Now we're nowhere near set up yet, but I thought this was kind of a fun little experiment. If we strum this and then plug these sound holes, you can see how much of a difference that makes. I'm going to finish doing a quick setup on this thing, and then we'll see how this sounds. And I present to you the completed 3-string cigar box guitar. Let's plug this thing in, see how it sounds. I've got this guy plugged into my little 50-watt Boss Katana amp. As a side note, anybody looking for a small practice amp, or dare I even say gig-worthy amp, this thing is pretty killer. Remember, I'm playing this upside down as well. Not that it's a whole lot different with bar chords, but it's still weird. This pickup, this guitar is tuned to open G. Had to think about that for a second. This thing sounds really good. Let's put on a little more gain and see what it sounds like. And just for fun, let's go to like a high gain channel. got quite a lot of sustain. Feedback. Well, that's going to wrap up this project. I'm going to put the old stamp on it and call this one complete. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know down below in the comments what you think of this build. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you next time.